Suave afternoon, suave afternoon, suave afternoon. This is Brother Suave, your mind-blowing, thought-provoking, and eye-opening on-air personality, life coach, psychotherapist, author, and creator. Hope you guys having a suavelous day.
Yeah, and with that, let's commence the pay.
Okay, I'm so suavelous, you so suavelous.
Together we can fix the trauma that's befallen us.
Divine social interactions remains marvelous.
Mind-blowing, suavelicious talk, higher consciousness. But think, let not your hearts be troubled, Dr. Brother Suave.
Divine light give you double.
Greetings, this is Dr. Brother Suave, your mind-blowing, thought-provoking, and eye-opening on-air personality, life coach, psychotherapist, divine social therapist, and most importantly, your host of Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave. Listen, I'm so excited about season 5, episode 4 on this beautiful Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. Man, it's such a blessing. And I just want to thank the Creator for waking me up to see another day I've never seen before, you never seen before, and billions have never seen before. But I also want to thank you for allowing me another day to get it right, and also another day to tell my friends, my associates, and family members, I love you. So I want to let you know, family, I love you guys. So I'm so happy to continue to acknowledge a Mental Health Awareness Week, man. Last week, man, we talked about hoarding. Oh, man, it was so exciting. I was able to go over hoarding. I did some videos. I talked about the 5 stages of hoarding. Man, listen. You could be young or old, black or white. Listen, hoarding impacts everybody. And when you have these emotional attachments to objects, you may be a hoarder. If you have a hard time letting things go, you may be a hoarder. If you're constantly shopping and buying things, you may be a hoarder. But nevertheless, man, be mindful, because I always say anything that goes unaddressed, it progressively gets worse. So be mindful. And so I'm not going to go too much about last week's session. Last week broadcast, because I want to really take the time, because we have about 60 minutes. So I really want to talk about my very special guest. Listen, this person is very special and dear to me in my heart, because it's not that we haven't seen each other in such a long time, but we have history. Man, we have so much history. I remember working as a professional, doing my own thing, my own practice. And when I connected with them, listen, this is why I always tell you, be humble, because there's so much you can learn. So when I got a chance to work for this person, and it was just a great experience, and I was able to work with this incredible organization called Trinity Community Mental Health Center, and I had an opportunity to serve as a clinical supervisor while she was our clinical director. Man, this woman is outstanding. She's, in my opinion, one of the world's greatest mental health professionals. You know, she's the founder of Trinity Community Mental Health Center. She's also the founder of Circle of Champions. She is one of South Florida's best psychotherapists, speakers, trainers, and transformational growth coaches. In addition, she is an esteemed licensed mental health professional counselor with over 25 years of experience. Listen, Sarai, she is an expert in this field, specifically focused on generational trauma, childhood trauma, and CPTSD. So what you do is call your friends, call your family members, call anybody that you know that needs to hear this information. They need to tune in, because trust, I guarantee you tonight's broadcast will be a mind-blowing, thought-provoking, and eye-opening experience. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on the wonderful, beautiful, and brilliant and talented Miss Sarai Nammur. Oh, blessings. Way happy to see
awesome
you.
Introduction. Wow.
Yes, you're suave, man.
I feel the same. Even if so much time passes by, we're still family, right?
Yes. I mean, it's just incredible. It's like, you guys don't understand, man. We have done so much. I mean, I just watch her grow as a person, and as a professional, a brilliant person all around, you know. And I'm just so excited, you know. And I know I said what I said, but I wanted you to just tell them a little bit about you in your own words, and just tell the people. And then I'm going to probably jump into some questions, but I want them to tell you a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, Suave gave me an amazing introduction, but It was, yes, it's I've been a therapist for 25 years. I own a community mental health center, Trinity Community Mental Health Center, and we're a trauma informed agency. I also love to teach the community on what trauma is, teach about thriving. The other side of trauma is thriving, and I love to do all these things. But for me, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't always that way for me. The reason why I do all this is because of my own trauma. I'm a survivor of complex PTSD, and I'm also a thriver of complex PTSD because I've healed and I've been able. I mean, I don't like to say healed because it's not one and done. It's a journey and it's a commitment to a different lifestyle. But everything that I do, my whole entire adult life has been in search of these answers of how to make life better, and how to make life better for people who have experienced any sort of childhood trauma or trauma, and it all came from my own pain, and this is my way of taking my power back, which is what I like to teach people, is that we get to take our power back. Once we become adults, we're able to take our power back. We're not responsible for what people did to us, but we are responsible for our life and creating the best life we can.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's, again, you put in the work, you get results. It's not something
Exactly.
that is one and done. It's almost like when people come in and think it's a single session solutions. No, no, it's not one and done. You have to put the work in. I always say potential without initiative, not but a conversation with yourself and others, and doing absolutely nothing. You can have all the potential in the world, but you got to put the work in. And
Absolutely.
obviously, that's your journey, making sure others understand that they're experiencing trauma and they have to put the work in. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
so, listen, I don't know. I just want to, break the ice. How was your day? How was your day? Was it okay?
I
Because
had
I
a
know
long
we had
day.
to
I
chat.
even told you I actually I feel like I'm catching a cold, but right
Uh-oh.
now it's not here.
Uh-oh. I mean, even mask.
We all wear virtual masks.
Yes, yes.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be
Yeah,
with you.
man. Because so you mentioned about your life and having experience in a journey of having certain trauma. So what made you get into this? You said, why do you do exactly what you do? What inspired you to get into mental health or even focusing on trauma?
Well, for me, I sort of tripped into it. I sort of tripped into going to college saved me basically. So I realized, like, people say, well, I don't have money and I can't go to college because I don't have money. Well, I didn't have money. I didn't have money either, and I was actually trying to leave the state of Florida because of things that were happening with my brother at my house. And so I wanted to leave, and I discovered that if I go to college, I could get student loans and that I could live off student loans. So I can't say that, oh, this, it just, I sort of fell into it. And as I fell into it, I just thought, well, psychology is something I'm really interested in.
Uh-huh.
And so I sort of fell into it. But as the time went by, I started gaining more and more interest in teaching or psychology. And it was between those two things. And then, as basically when I got my bachelor's, I went to school in Kansas, and when I got my bachelor's, I came back just wanting to work in the community where I grew up, and from that point on, it just became a mission. From
Yeah.
that point on, I realized, like, I want to help people that grew up just like me, and I want to show people that you're not trapped in that life. You could choose. And I'm an example of that, of being able to choose and being able to create a life that we want, not the life that was given to us or not the life that was expected of us. And so I just sort of fell into that. And then, here at Trinity, I actually thought, I want to have a shelter for foster kids. And God didn't give it to me that way. God gave it to us through the contracts. Remember the contracts that we had here in Trinity?
Yes.
And and then we started working with foster kids here. So it came in a different way. I knew what I wanted, but it came in a different way.
Yeah.
And for me, I wanted that because I had lived in 17 houses by the time I was 16. So I know what it felt like to carry your stuff in a garbage bag and move from house to house. So I was never a foster kid, but I knew what that felt like. So I definitely wanted to work with foster kids. So whatever you desire, you could
Hmm.
end up having. And so it just came in a different way, in a different package, which was us doing therapy here in Trinity with all the dependency cases that we had at that time, which you were part of that. You were part of that whole trauma because we all got traumatized too.
Yes, it was,
Oh
but
my
it
God.
was great work. It was great work, and it was great that your vision manifests into a reality because you had the vision, and you definitely, and I could say as a professional coming in, I always had my suaveness, my confidence, but working with you, I grew as a professional, as I always told you, that when we kept doing, because I had that training in trauma, however, you took it to a whole nother level. And this is how you was able to see, just looking at a community mental health center to a trauma informed care center. And you really, I'm talking about the training, you guys, training, training, training. I'm sorry, training, training, training. you
I know.
know,
I got obsessed.
yes.
I got obsessed for 4 years. I don't know, for 4 or 5 years. I got obsessed with it.
But the thing is, it showed us in our traditional training how going to graduate school and all. I can say I didn't think it did us a justice because the training that you gave us, you know how people always, and when we was trained, we looked at the presenting problem. But when we learned about trauma, we realized that was
Yeah.
just the surface. It was almost everybody had PTSD. And when you learn about it, everyone has it because everyone has some form of it. Everyone has, when it breaks it down, the environment, car accidents, or seeing someone hurt, all those different forms. And most people, they're in denial about it. And it was just as
Yeah.
a professional, I really grew.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because I guess we should define like what trauma informed
Yeah,
care
that
is.
was my next question, really.
That's funny. So for your audience, trauma informed care means that we are, first of all, it's the delivery of service. So we work collaboratively with clients. We're not higher than you. We're on your team, and you're the expert on your life.
Thank you.
So that's one of the ways that we work with you. But the other thing is that we look at everyone through the trauma lens. So there are people that come in saying, I'm depressed. I've been depressed for X amount of years, and maybe they're in their 40s. But if we don't do what, as a trauma informed agency, we got to do the trauma assessments day one. So we ask the hard questions early on so that we can see if there's any underlying trauma that hasn't been resolved or hasn't been healed that's actually still causing you issues right now. It could be causing you issues in your family life, in the money you make, in your health, not just physical health, but also physical and mental health. But we psychoeducate a lot on the impact that trauma has on us. That we think it's over because we grew up, and that's not the way it works. We don't just grow out of the trauma. We bring it with us in this little invisible luggage full of stuff that we haven't healed, and it really just shows up in our life. It shows up in all these, for I think the most important areas, that when people go to church, the thing that they pray for is something about their relationship, something about their money, or something about their health. And when you have childhood trauma, especially the type that comes from complex PTSD, like ongoing trauma where your body never had a chance, your nervous system, your body, your brain, you never had a chance to just relax, and you were constantly on fight or flight, that affects all areas of your life, not just your mind. So it's important for people to know that. I really think it's important for the community to know this, because when you go seeking therapy, I mean, I'm biased because I'm trauma informed now. So I think everyone needs a trauma informed therapist, right? Like
Yes,
everyone.
absolutely.
I think it's a disservice for us to diagnose people with these disorders without scratching the surface of their childhood trauma. It's such a disservice. It makes people feel like broken or it's their fault. When
Yeah.
in reality, a lot of our behaviors that appear dysfunctional were very functional at the time that they were created because they helped us survive. So it could be addictions, it could be your anger, your rage, overeating. All these behaviors that are dysfunctional later on were functional at the time that we needed to use those behaviors or do those things so that we don't die, so that we're able to cope with the craziness happening at home. So I want to validate, your anyone listening to this that maybe is sitting there with a diagnosis that didn't really that they didn't really look into your traumas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you have childhood sexual abuse, if
Yeah.
you have a loss of a parent, and or if you know there's so many incarceration of a parent, if you witness domestic violence at home, if you witness your mother being hurt, these are traumas that are long lasting that affect us, not just in our mind.
Yes. Absolutely. And then so you touch bases on some of the things I was going to ask you.
Oh, sorry.
So no. I'm happy that you're on that flow. That's good. So listen. So you mentioned about moving a lot, because I will ask people, have they experienced any trauma a lot, and they would say no. So you mentioned about moving. So can you explain to our listening audience, because people don't think moving a lot and not making a connection to other people and not want to have relationships and bonds with people, how moving a lot can be traumatizing.
Well, so and I think that's very individual to the
Mhm.
person. For me, the moving a lot didn't really affect me until a specific time period where moving was moving away from my parents, where I lived in, I don't know, I think I lived in 5 different houses. I lived like in a few friends' houses and my cousins' houses. And that was the hard part for me. A lot of the other moving was really like a little bit of an upgrade, but that time period was probably the most traumatic thing I had ever experienced in my life. Because you know, we got to remember back then we didn't have cell phones.
No.
We didn't have cell phone. I couldn't just call my mom or call my dad. I actually never knew it, you know, if I was going to see them today, if I was going to see my mom today. I didn't know. So it was extremely scary and traumatic for a 14-year-old that was 14 years old.
Mhm.
So that's like a huge disconnect. I mean, as children, we feel safe in our home.
Yes.
We're supposed to feel safe in our home. We're supposed to feel like our family unit is protecting us.
Mhm.
And so when that happened, that was very difficult. And also, I think I went to 4 elementaries, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools, or 3 elementaries, two middle schools, and 2 high schools. And that could be traumatic for a child. I don't believe that for me it was. I don't think that part was traumatic because I was in the same area. It maybe it wasn't a big deal, but it's maybe it was, and I don't even notice it. Also,
Okay.
I don't even notice that it was, but it was 7 schools, seven schools and 17 houses in total.
Yeah.
The only reason I know it was 17 houses is because of um, an event that I was doing that I had to talk about this. So I did a timeline, and then I
Yeah.
was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. It was 17 houses. I didn't even know this until I did the timeline,
Yeah.
which is which is something we do in therapy,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Yes. And so because I know many others, because I wanted you to share like with many others, because for you it may not have been traumatizing, but being able others to find themselves trying to get comfortable and having to move and getting to the point they don't want to build relationships because they know that they're going to be moving and how that can affect them psychologically.
Yeah. So if you're a child and you're being moved around like that, and there's no concrete relationships that you could count on, and they're constantly changing, then it does affect our ability to have relationships, maintain relationships. It affects our perception of the world, our
Yeah.
perception of people, our perception of, you know, are people trustworthy, like in general. And then
Mhm.
these children grow up to be adults that don't trust people, that they're the ones that are they can't commit to a relationship. And a lot of times as adults we look perfectly normal on the outside, but then when you become intimate with a person and you try to have a relationship,
Mhm.
you know, then it gets very confusing. You know, it
Yes.
can be very confusing. But someone like that who was bounced around and was unable to have long-term concrete relationships, they they don't trust, but that's perfectly normal.
Yes.
That's perfectly normal to not trust, but the person needs to heal through that also.
Yes. Absolutely. So, man, I wanted to ask you some questions, if you don't mind, dealing with because I know a lot of times people they familiar with PTSD. You know, they throw around that real loosely, but complex PTSD. Can you talk about that?
So the way that I look at it is PTSD is, you know, we normally hear PTSD with the military and soldiers, which they could also get complex PTSD from being war and that sort of thing. But complex PTSD has more to do with our nervous system. I mean, in terms of it has more to do with the things that trigger us. It has more to do with people with complex PTSD have more relationship issues than someone with just PTSD. So there's a big difference between, for example, I go to the grocery store and I get held up and someone puts a gun to my head. Okay, that could cause me PTSD, but that's not, complex PTSD is more about a child that's raised in a home or in an environment where there's so much trauma that they basically rarely had a moment where there wasn't trauma. So that affects you. Complex PTSD affects you spiritually, mentally, physically. It affects your immune system. It affects your ability to grow, your development. It affects every aspect of who that child is, especially if it happens earlier. Like imagine an infant who never really had, from infancy all the way to adulthood, they never really experienced a lack of trauma or a lack of these very stressful, traumatic experiences. That's what complex PTSD is. And then with complex PTSD, you have the shame and the guilt that isn't always necessarily associated to PTSD. So it's the core shame that you see in narcissistic personality disorder. Or there's also the abandonment wound that you see in dependent personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. So as an adult, if you get PTSD because you were held up, you're not going to develop a personality disorder. However, if you're a child with complex PTSD, you could develop codependency, you could develop all sorts of other mental health issues, including personality disorders. So the impact is completely different.
Absolutely.
Is there more? Is that a good answer?
No, it's a swaptastic answer.
Okay.
And so here's another thing when it comes to traumatized. Can a person be re-traumatized? Because some people, say, well, I was re-traumatized. And so explain that.
Yeah. So the person who has trauma, who has not processed their trauma, lives with their trauma all the time. And it's just stirring inside of you, right? So if me as a therapist, I meet with you and I ask you questions about your trauma, I am not re-traumatizing you. I'm actually giving you an opportunity to take that out of you. I'm giving you an opportunity to process that in a safe environment where you're not going to be judged, where you're not going to be gaslit, where there's an atmosphere of acceptance of who you became and the things, because then here we go with the shame and guilt again, because someone like that probably has done a lot of things to cope that they're not very proud of either. And so it's a good environment for you to process. So we're trained to understand that no, we cannot re-traumatize someone who already has that trauma. Could they be re-traumatized because they're in a relationship where now they're experiencing domestic violence? That could be re-traumatizing. So that's different. And we could continue to re-traumatize ourselves because we never healed. So we keep reliving the same pattern and the same dynamic in our adult life that we had as children.
Okay. Yes, because I'm just asking you some questions. So many people say, well, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to be re-traumatized. And so they think by talking about it, instead of having that safe place to discuss it, they interpret it as re-traumatized.
Well, the thing is that I would ask that person, like, it's leaking out in other ways. It's leaking out in your parenting. It's leaking out in your relationships. It's leaking out in your communication. It's leaking out in your fear, in your shame, in your guilt, because that person secretly is living with fear, shame, and guilt. So therefore, they're unable to become all that they could be. They're unable to tap into their full potential and all the possibilities that exist within them. Why? Because they're of the fear, the shame, and the guilt associated to all this trauma. I guarantee that someone with complex PTSD, if it's not healed, for sure you're having relationship problems. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Because we got to work through all of that. We got to relearn. We have to relearn ways of communicating. Also parenting. I mean, nothing changes just because we became adults. We're
Yeah.
still that same person with all those issues, showing up as adults, now having kids, now getting into relationships, getting a job, trying to be responsible, but then I can't really be responsible because I'm dealing with all this emotional stuff, but you're faking it. So all this is happening. So whoever says I don't want to talk about it because I'm gonna get re-traumatized, I'd say you're probably living in trauma every day of your life.
Mhm.
You're recreating it.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we tend to reenact what we don't heal from.
Yes, and so would you consider sign and symptom characteristics of trauma when a person's always dealing with self-blame?
Yes, self-blame, self-loathing,
Mhm.
that's self-hatred. That is part of the shame. That's part of the shame and the guilt with that criticism of ourselves. That's definitely a symptom. Mhm.
Yes. So would you consider a breakup? Because some people mask their breakup. Could that be considered trauma or traumatizing for a person? Because some people like, I'm happy, it's over. But how true is that a lot of times when it comes to people breaking up?
Well, and
And I'm
also
not
how
talking about as a result of some coping mechanism, but sometimes it could be traumatic for some other, where they're just sometimes incapacitated.
incapacitated.
They
What do you
can't
mean?
function, and so when they dealing with a breakup, some people say that was traumatic for them,
Of course, because so I have a theory. My theory is that for everyone who experiences childhood trauma, the biggest trauma, no matter what your trauma looked like, the real trauma underneath all of that is abandonment. No, even if it was physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, whatever kind of abuse, the person at the end of the day feels abandoned, neglected, not seen, not heard, none of that. So what happens to someone that, like what you just described, is that they're re-experiencing the abandonment.
Yes.
So it shows up again, but they don't even realize it. They don't even realize that that's what it is, because maybe that person refuses to get help. But
Hmm.
then you could have an emotional an emotional flashback as opposed to a visual flashback. So
Hmm.
an emotional flashback is when we don't understand why we're feeling what we're feeling, when we're either in a rage or we're so devastated, or we feel like we're anticipating something, and the person might start panicking in anticipation of a breakup, or that sort of thing. That's an emotional flashback that they might not know where it's coming from, but it could be coming from their childhood, from this
Hmm.
neglect that I speak of.
Yes. Oh man, that was so great. We're going to continue, Sarai, but we're going to go into station identification, and we'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Tune in and stream live now. Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave, the podcast, is now being broadcast on NPN Voice. NPN Voice can be found on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud, and now on Audible and Amazon Music, and anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave, the podcast, now on NPN Voice. NPN Voice. Got voice. You heard?
We're shining bright. And we're shining the light on us like no other. Neighborhood Planet. Our neighborhood, our world.
with Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave with a very special guest, Sarai Nammur. We're talking about trauma and early childhood trauma. Sarai, I wanted to go into a few questions, and then I'm going to go into generational trauma. But the question I want to ask you was, how do you think trauma manifests in one's life, and how does trauma impact like relationships, parenting, the workplace, and just our general daily functioning?
So, okay. So, when I speak of trauma, I'm speaking of childhood trauma. and I guess more specifically, I always speak of complex PTSD.
Yes.
And the person who doesn't do the healing is always vulnerable to being triggered. And most of the time, it isn't the problems that causes problems. It's our emotions that causes problems, because we bump into an issue and we can't even handle the issue because we're emotionally triggered. And for a child who never learned self-soothing, who was never soothed either, and never learned that, then you just grow up into being someone who then could be raging, who could be having panic attacks, who gets depressed, who deals with so much anxiety. And then when that happens, you could be a high functioning person that does that, or a low functioning person that does that. But you're still dealing with it. And that person shows up in the world. We show up, in the world, we show up at work, we show up in relationships, we show up at the teacher conference in school, and and then they're talking about your kid, and then maybe you like tell the person off because you
the grocery store line.
So then all of this is the part where, as adults, we all need to take responsibility for our lives, and we need to look at, okay, how did I become who I became? And then part of therapy with me is being compassionate. You became who you became because of what you went through, because you had to survive. So you had to think certain things. You had to feel in a certain way. Like, I'm really good at reading body language. I'm really good at reading facial expressions and all that, because I didn't have a safe home. So I had to pay attention to these things to keep myself safe. And so we develop these skills, but at the same time, we could be repressing ourselves. I know people that, in order to stop abuse from happening, they had to go into rages. So then what happens? They become an adult who rages. Or people who, in order to stop sexual abuse, gained 200, 300 pounds. And then that's what the ACEs, the ACEs test, study wasn't really about childhood trauma. It was really about obesity. And then what happened was they found that these people who were obese, once they lost all their weight, they would gain it back. But when they further investigated, they found out that a lot of the women gained their weight back when they got hit on, and that just triggered them. It triggered them, and then they gained all the weight that they had lost. They would gain it back in a month. So that's how this study, which was about obesity, became about adverse childhood experiences and its effects on us. But all this trauma affects us in all aspects of our lives if we don't do, and it's so sad. It's so sad. Healing is so available.
Yes, it is available.
So it's so sad to watch people never reach. I mean, it's Les Brown who says it, that the saddest place in the world is the cemetery, because of how many dreams are buried. It's not the bodies, it's the amount of dreams that are buried in there. And we're not meant to just survive life. We're meant to thrive. We're meant to thrive. We're meant to reach our we would have to live so many lifetimes to reach our fullest potential. And it's so sad to watch people who continue to live in the pain, or continue to get results that are painful, because they're just reenacting over and over these old patterns, and they don't get the help that they need so they could be free. So that, it's like, so I say, like, God hired me to do this job. God hired me to bring you out of the darkness so you can see the light of what's possible for you. There's so much possible. I mean, what if I would have never gone to school? What if I would have never, I'm a high school kick out. So what if I would have never left to California and Kansas? What would have happened to me? My brother died 2 years ago. He was younger than me. He's a result of all this as well. People that I grew up with, I mean, I need more than two hands to know how many people passed away. Like people I know are just coming out of prison from 20 years ago. Like that's the group of, that was my environment. What if I wouldn't have changed? So, and I say that because what if you don't change? Not you, Suave, but anybody listening. Like, what if you don't discover your true potential? What if you don't do your healing? It affects it. It has the same way that my healing and my decision to go in this path had ripple effects, even into the community, because I created Trinity and all of this. Not doing the healing also causes a ripple effect in a very negative direction into our kids, into our community, into so many areas, into our health, everything.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, you said it. And it's healing out there. I know that mental health is trending more than it did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think people should really take advantage of it. I personally believe it should be initiated and being in school. You know how back in the day when we were in school, they had home ec. I just believe that they should have trauma informed classes in high
Yes,
school, both.
I agree.
But that was one of the questions that towards the end I was going to ask you, because you have done such a great job. And so I know we talked about trauma. I know we talked about the signs and symptoms of manifestation, how it affects us parenting. But I want to go into this great organization, Thrive.
Thrive Life.
Thrive Life. I want you to talk about it because it's game changing for a lot of people. So I want you to tell the mission and the purpose behind Thrive Life.
So Thrive Life is a curriculum I developed. I've been doing it for 2 years. I probably have to get better at promoting it. I have to get better at doing that.
Mhm.
But it's a membership program that I have. I meet with it's my inner circle. I meet with my group every Tuesday at 7 p.m. And it's a group format. It's probably the most affordable way to work with me is through Thrive Life, because it is a group membership. But it's very powerful. It like the results in there can compare. You get a different type of result in there than you would with me, because there you have community. Like we have a chat and they're constantly talking to each other, and it's not therapy. So this Thrive Life is more about helping you reach. My passion is helping you reach your full potential, helping you, like I said, like dragging you out of the darkness, pulling you whatever I need to do, to get you out of the darkness, because that's how I save lives. So I save lives in as far as the dreams. I'm interested in saving your life, but I'm interested in saving your life, the way you live, all of this, like what you have to give to this world. I feel like we all have a purpose here. So like just the death of our purpose is so painful, right?
Yes.
It's and I see people with so much potential, and then it just drives me crazy, and I've learned to have limits with that because sometimes I would work harder than the person. Now at least I'm able to recognize, all right, so you don't want to work on this now, and I'm able to to not force you to work on. I'm able to do that. But so I created this transformational growth cycle, and so I teach it in the group. And step one is to increase awareness of why we became who we became, identifying all those parts of us, which is hard. It's hard to do that. But once you have the awareness of who you became and why you became, it creates compassion for yourself, because you're able to see your inner child. Like there's a version of all of us that was 8 at one point, 9, 10, 11, like every one of these years, something was happening. If you're the type of person that I work with, something was probably happening at every one of those years.
Yes.
So we tend to judge what we did back then at 14, 15, 16, but we're not that person currently. And our 14-year-old version didn't have the coping skills.
Exactly.
He didn't have the coping skills, didn't have the support, was simply trying to survive the day. So, but then if we don't do the work, we drag on those behaviors into our adult life. So the first thing we do is increase self-awareness, and also increase awareness of your vision of who you're trying to become. It's almost like a self-leadership program because it helps you stop being a victim of your life so that you can start leading your life. So that's really at the core of it. I would say that's really what it is teaching you to move away from victim talk, victim thinking, victim feelings, victim behaviors, so that you can start thriving. But we can't thrive if we're not leading ourselves. So that's what the core of the program is to help you develop your vision so that you and that's why I say, and I posted something today or yesterday about this, about the battle. The biggest battle is where we're fighting, we could see who we're trying to become, but
Mhm.
the old version of us is pulling us back. So we got to win that battle daily, or else we're
Yeah.
going to show up as that old version that we don't even want to be anymore. So it's a daily battle. And then until you start winning and you actually start becoming the new version of you, which is there. If you could see it, it's in the timeline. It's in your like Brother Suave. I'm sure you saw Brother Suave before Brother Suave showed up, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I,
Exactly.
I definitely love the philosophy between with Strive Life. Thrive Life is because when I always talked about self love, and more and more people are starting to have an understanding. So when you have self awareness, you can really look deep inside yourself and start being attentive to your actions, the people around you, and some of the patterns that you have done that have been proven to be counterproductive. Because self awareness is everything. That's why because sometimes you're in denial, you don't pay attention, and when you get self aware and you mix that up with some self love, man,
Mhm.
you're thriving. Because
And so self-awareness is very difficult because especially if you're a survivor of childhood any type of abuse, because then you become aware, and then guess what happens when you become aware? Shame shows up.
pain,
Shame
yes,
shows his ugly little head, and then you want to pull back into like denial and avoidance and not deal with stuff anymore and say, I already got over that, that doesn't even affect me anymore. And
mhm,
I'm like, I'm watching it affect you right now.
yes.
We've seen that so much. We're like, what do you mean it's not affecting you?
It's funny, yeah, because you hit it, shame and guilt. Because when you're aware, like, okay, um, it's just like I'm going to like how when nurturing parenting program, and you show us so much evidence that beating wasn't the right thing to do, and
Yeah,
then you as a parent, you're like, man, I beat my son, I tore his butt up, and then when you get him aware, you're like, oh my god, that was wrong. I caused more trauma to the person, and they sitting there. You're like, wow. Then you start feeling shame, feeling guilty. But what the important thing is that you confront yourself with it. You know what
I
I'm
know.
saying, and learn from it. But most people, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed about it. They're ashamed. But the
I
thing is,
know.
it's so important to confront yourself, because those actions have been proven to be counterproductive. So you have to confront it, face forward. Look at, like I said, look at the man in the mirror, confront that person, and your life can change. It's just that get the training. Um, um, like I remember Les Brown said, you don't have to be great to get started, but you got to start to become great. So sometimes you just got to go head in and strive for greatness.
Yeah, and that's so funny. I was laughing when you were saying that because I remember when I went when we I don't remember if you went or if I went and then I trained everyone on it. But when I did the nurturing parenting, man, that changed me because
Yes.
remember I was like traumatized me. I was like, hold up. So I've been a horrible mom this whole time. Because you and I are old school, and man, my 26-year-old and my 23-year-old have a completely different mom
Different.
from my 10-year-old. My 10-year-old,
Yes. Yes.
she doesn't even know she's a princess. My other kids, my other kids, I say my other, which I have a
Yes.
great relationship with them, and thank God for the nurturing parenting program because it
Yes.
changed me.
It taught me.
It changed me. I was like, wow, like so we're not supposed to hit our kids. Like that's what. Isn't that crazy,
Yes, and
guys?
it's
And
passed
don't judge
on generation after generation.
Suave's community. Don't judge me. This is real. This is real. Like the nurturing parenting program taught us that under no circumstances is hitting a good thing. But not only did it's not that they teach it, they help me understand why. So I was
Hmm.
like, oh, I think a bunch of therapists that were in there that have kids, I
Yeah.
think we were all like, wow.
Yes.
I have to go and say sorry to my kids because
Yes.
it really explained the psychological effects
It's a
long
huge
term of
psychological effect.
hitting your children. And then I came back and I think you fought me a little bit on it too until we kept on talking and talking. You're like, yes, it is terrible. But my daughter, like, she has no idea. She has no idea.
Hey, the first set, when children, the older ones have a different experience with that parent. Like you say, you're not the same person anymore. You have to
Right.
get past the shame and guilt, and you're learning. You're constantly evolving, becoming a better version of yourself each and every year.
Exactly. That's why I say it's a journey. It's not a one and done thing, because here I'm about to celebrate my 54th birthday, like in 6 weeks or 7 weeks. And I had my sons at 27 and 30. Definitely, I was not an evolved human being at that time. I was doing my best. I was like just trying to do the right thing and go to college and and do these things but I was not evolved. I didn't even start really in my own personal growth till about 33 years old. And then that's a whole journey. 33 to now, wow, I'm even a completely different person from the last time you and I spoke 2 years ago, because it just starts going faster and faster the deeper you go into it. And it's exciting. It's just now it's like exciting to see what else could I do.
Yes, absolutely.
What's next? What else
Was-
could I do? And it's
and-
exciting to be a representation of a survivor of complex PTSD and show others, like the 4-minute mile. I could show people, hey, I did it. Of course you could do it. Of course you could do it. You could do same as you.
Yes, absolutely. And this is one thing. Our general, how you doing, Brother Kai? A lot of time, our community is looking for examples. And when we tell our story, that's why we believe in transparency equates to empowerment, because a lot of times people don't believe that the person they look up to was a survivor.
Right.
A survivor, like, wait a minute, they experienced, and sometimes you are motivation to them to see that a person overcame. And so when I mentioned about the parenting, nurturing parenting, and I just wanted to just address this when it comes to trauma, because when you're in denial about corporal punishment, you look at it and say, well, I turned out right. And a lot of times I see adults trying to answer child questions from an adult mindset. And so what I do is try to say, okay, let's answer that question when you was that 7-year-old kid.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Tell me how you felt about your parent when they was beating you. I said, they said, no, I said, no. You're 40-year-old answering that question. I say, no, let's go back to the 7-year-old who's getting beat. And then they have this look on their face, and they tend to say, I was angry with them. I hated them. They was acting like they was trying to kill me. And I would ask them, do you feel it could have been traumatized? No. I said, no. Go back to the 7-year-old. You feel that could be traumatizing? And they were like, yeah. And so unbeknownst to us parents who was doing those things, it could be traumatizing to our children and don't even realize the long-term effect if we continue that. You know how some parents continue and they bully their children and they never try to address what they did was wrong.
Yeah, that's 100% for sure. Like for me, the other way that it showed up also was leaving my kids a lot with my mom or my dad, because I grew up that way. So I didn't see anything wrong with it, but there was a lot wrong with it, because pretty much I was abandoning them. I was busy doing my stuff, which was, working, building Trinity and all this stuff, but they were being neglected because they didn't have mom and dad. They were with grandma and grandpa. So that is also a really strong way where we neglect our kids, that we don't think we're doing it because it's family, but grandparents have a position, which is being the grandparent. It's not being the parent.
Yes, exactly.
And so our kids there's mom, there's dad, there's grandma, there's grandpa, but grandma and grandpa cannot be mom and dad.
Yes.
And when they try to be that, or when they're forced to be that, the kids always have an emptiness left in them of, where was my mom and my dad?
Yes. And who really loves me? Do my mom, or they putting me over here because they're trying to get rid of me or what? And then they could have these issues of abandonment, you know?
And it took me a long time to even tell a lot of my story. I probably just started really telling my story over the last 3 years to where I don't feel emotional about it. But I use myself a lot as an example because, again, to show people that I'm also human, and truly my life has been a journey. And
Yes.
I did make mistakes with my kids when they were younger because I didn't know. But what I've learned is that when you know better, you do better. So every time I've known better, I've taken responsibility and I do better. And I'm a strong believer of that. That's part of my theory too, is if I could give people information, if we could provide people, even through this podcast, if we could provide people with information, just know information could lead to your transformation. And just knowing better makes you do better if you choose. If
you have discipline and follow through, because you have to follow through with the information.
Yes,
you
exactly.
have to
Not just be a consumer, but put it into action. Do something.
Yes, absolutely. That's wonderful. Listen, all this work you have done, this life work, and all the people you have touched, you touched so many lives. And I know that Thrive Life has a curriculum, but have you ever considered writing like a book or curriculum that will go into public or private schools or even universities? Because your perspectives and philosophies it changed lives. And I think it should be on a bigger platform. I know we have social media, something that we didn't have a long time ago, but I think that curriculum should be going into both public and private schools as well as universities. Because as you see, a lot of young adults, they're still struggling with some things, and I think that curriculum will be beneficial to our society at large because they're trying to go through college and trying to survive, and they should be able to just really enjoy college as an experience that it should be, and not just social media mode.
I mean, thank you for saying that. Thank you for always being a voice of confirmation. Like, guys, Suave is like super awesome. He's very positive. He's always a voice. And for those of you that don't know him, he's a major gentleman. But anyway, that's besides the point. But yes, that's confirmation for me because I am in the middle of writing a book, but I'm on and off. I have a writing coach now to hold me accountable. But I'm on and off with this. I have so many things that I end up dabbling in things, which is not good. But yeah, I'm writing a book called Thrive Life about with the whole transformational growth cycle and everything.
Yes, because I mean, when you have those lessons, I mean, we leave legacies. Those are so important to leave legacies. Had it not been for people who wrote those nurturing parenting curriculums, the people who did the research when it comes to trauma, because they didn't have that when we were in school, and I believe all this trauma training that you have taught hundreds of people and thousands of people. I just believe that had that been there 100 years ago, I think we'll be in a different place.
Yeah, or even now. Childhood trauma is a pandemic issue. It's all over the world.
It is. And then it just reminds me of, and I'm not saying anything about what I've done, but it's just imprinted in my head. And I'm talking about someone having early childhood trauma and their life could have been gone away in prison for years, and they had this childhood trauma and it was never addressed.
Yeah.
And here we are getting it 40 years later, and a lot of times people don't understand how if it never is addressed, it's going to get worse. And just imagine millions of people understood what they was experiencing as children and how it could have been avoiding impacting the lives of others as adults.
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine parents understanding what trauma did to them so that they don't pass it on to their children. Imagine all of that. Like, one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten actually is I was able to see my father heal. I was able to see my father transform his life. So he is also an example for me that says, like, wow, you could change. People could change.
Your father's awesome, by the way. I mean,
yeah, like he is such a different person, you know, and I've gotten to understand him too. Which, by the way, just to put a little thing in there, is a little clip in there, is just because we understand people doesn't mean we have to tolerate them. But I've been able to understand where it comes, where his anger came from, and he's completely changed. He's completely changed, and he has such a great understanding now. And to me, that's the greatest gift, because I know so many people who are in their 40s, 50s, whatever, or they're even older and their parents are 70s and 80s, and they're like, well, they're never going to change. And that's not my story. My father has completely changed. He's transformed, and he showed me that it doesn't matter at what age, you could always change. It's a choice. And how amazing is it to do that in this lifetime? How amazing is it to not, you know, pass on with all that pain in your heart, you know? So anyone could change. Anyone could change. Anyone could heal. Anyone could start. You could have been doing bad for so many years, and then you could shift gears and start giving good to the people in your life, and start planting new seeds of love, you know. So it's love versus fear, love versus anger, you know. And so you could, at any point, it's never too late to change for anyone, you know, listening.
Absolutely. So as we close out, tell the listening audience how they can possibly become a Thrive Life member. Also tell them how to contact you on any of the social media outlets. And if they need any services, for those who are in South Florida, tell them how they can get in contact with you and get those great services that you have to offer.
Well, my name is Sarai Nammur. You can find me everywhere, Sarai Nammur. I could also give a gift to your audience. I could give them a link with the whole transformational growth cycle that they could read into it. As far as if you follow me anywhere, you'll see like the different events that I do. And as far as my email is sarai@sarainammur.com. If anyone's interested in being part of Thrive Life or learning more, they could just send me an email.
Okay. Well, listen, this has been a amazing time. I'm so happy. Listen, we're going to have to start back connecting. I'm telling you. Yes.
We should do a series on your show.
Okay. Yes, that'll be a great idea. And I'll definitely get with you. So listen, this has been a mind-blowing, thought-provoking, and eye-opening experience with our very special guest, Sarai Nammur. Listen, make sure you tune in each and every Wednesday at 8:30 for Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave. And again, this has been a mind-blowing, thought-provoking, eye-opening experience. So just remember, great minds reach great places. I love you. I mean it. Bye-bye.
Tune in and stream live now. Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave, the podcast, is now being broadcast on NPN Voice. NPN Voice can be found on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud, and now on Audible and Amazon Music, and anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. Social Therapy with Dr. Brother Suave, the podcast, now on NPN Voice. NPN Voice. Got voice. You heard? This program was made possible by Neighborhood Planet Broadcasting Systems, Neighborhood Planet Network, and from contributions to NPN TV from viewers like you. Thank you.